Secretary of Defense Weinberger, members of the Council on Foreign Affairs, guests and friends. It's indeed a pleasure to welcome you this evening on behalf of the trustees of the Council to another of our late afternoon meetings. I'd like to, as we did last week, thank especially our corporate sponsors who are listed in your program, who have been especially important to the support of this organization. And in that light, I'd like to thank, for example, Mr. William Beesman of the Savings Bank of Baltimore, which has been a long and staunch supporter of our organization. I'd also like to especially thank the First National Bank of Maryland for their support in this evening's program. Mr. Beesman, member of our trustees, known to most of you, it gives me a great deal of pleasure to welcome him at this time to introduce the Secretary.
I thank Frank for those kind words. You're always so flattering. And I want to thank our guest this afternoon for allowing me a few moments to talk about the Baltimore Council on Foreign Affairs. Dr. Bird mentioned our support, that is the Savings Bank of Baltimore's support, of the Council's activities. We support it, that is the bank, not personally, not out of a sense of charity or magnanimity. We support it as a matter of self-interest. We support it, and we believe that the long-term interest of business is better served when its citizens and its communities are well informed. And this extends to international affairs, foreign relations. We all know Baltimore, despite the fact that it's been a major international seaport for years and years and years. We've always had a rather parochial or provincial outlook on worldly affairs. It's our nature. And our council, the ones that we form, provides a forum to discuss these foreign issues, major foreign issues. And so doing, we believe, by holding these discussions, that goes a long way to dispelling that traditional insularity that seems to inculcate our communities. This is particularly important in a major seaport such as Baltimore. Now, the quality of the program that this council has put on, starting way back, from our first one with Mr. Krasinski, about 2 years ago, up at the Hilton, they have been unmatched, they're unparalleled, they've been superior. Put them against any other council in the country. This is particularly important. They have served to give Baltimore additional recognition on a national basis. And that particular form and discussion of foreign affairs, in my opinion, has been ignored too long here in our Baltimore community. Therefore, I find it very pleased to have contributed and to have been a part of the sector. Now, after having said that, as a member of the fundraising committee of the Baltimore Council on Foreign Affairs, I note that we'll begin soliciting additional resources, money, for our 1982-1983 program, program year which commences in September. The financial need in order to continue these fine programs is very real. And your continued and increased support will be needed. I urge you to respond supportingly. Contact by our fundraiser, peruse the information out in the lobby, visit us at our offices down in the World Trade Center on the 21st floor. Now, with that said, allow me to turn our attention to our reason for being here today, to honor a distinguished American, Caspar Weinberger, currently the Secretary of Defense of the United States. To keep it short, well, I've cut down about 3 pages of background, 1.5. So if you bear with me for a moment. Mr. Weinberger earned his undergraduate degree from Harvard in 1938 and subsequently received his law degree from the same school in 1941. He's also a member of Phi Beta Kappa. Following the school, law school, we joined the Army as a private. 4 years later, released as a captain. During that time, he served as a member of General Douglas MacArthur's intelligence staff. After World War II, Secretary Weinberger served as law clerk at the Court of Appeals for 2 years, joined the law firm Heller, Ehrman, White, and McAuliffe in San Francisco, where he was a partner up until 1969. Served in the Assembly of the California State Legislature, wrote a semi-weekly column for a number of California newspapers, moderated a weekly local public affairs television program, was a staff book reviewer for San Francisco newspaper and a magazine from 59 to 69. In 1967, he was named chairman of the Commission on California State Government Organization, that was called the Little Blue Commission, as I recall. He was appointed by the then Governor Reagan as Director of Finance of California in 68. Served until 1970, appointed by President Nixon as Chairman of the Federal Trade Commission. 6 months later, he was named Deputy Director of the Office of Management and Budget and became Director of that office in 72. President Nixon appointed Secretary Weinberger in 73 as Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare. He continued to head that department until President Ford, until he resigned and went to private business in 1975. Before being nominated by President Reagan to be Secretary of Defense, Mr. Weinberger was Vice President, Director, and General Counsel of the Bechtel Group of Companies. It's my very great pleasure to welcome to the Council and introduce to you Secretary of Defense of the United States, Caspar E. Weinberger. I look forward to his discussion of American defense policy.
Very nice, a very generous introduction. I told him the less said about me, the better, but he obviously didn't pay attention to that. But I appreciate very much the very kind words, and it's a delight to be here. I'm very happy to have an opportunity to talk with you about some of these vital issues that face us all, and also particularly pleased to have an opportunity to have some questions. So I'll try to keep the talk as brief as possible. Difficult for a lawyer to do. Lawyers can barely clear their throats in 10 or 15 minutes, but we'll try to do our best because I would like to have as much time as possible for questions. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the defense strategy under which we're operating, but perhaps more important, why we're operating under it. And we're operating under a strategy that requires that we regain our defensive strength as quickly as we can. That we regain it.
Mr. Weinberger, that's a lie. We were never behind in defense. We started the bomb. We built the bomb. We never been behind. We've always been ahead. I call on you to just arm. I call on you to get our country out of the arms race and do what you can to disarm right now.
It's a little difficult to see how the
Mr. Weinberger, I call on you as Secretary of Defense to disarm our nation. The nuclear arms race is going to cost us all our lives. The nuclear arms race will cost us all of our lives. The nuclear arms race will cost us all of our lives. It means destruction of the world. The nuclear arms race means the destruction of the world. I call on you to get us out of the arms race. Mr. Weinberger, I call on you to get us out of the arms race. Mr. Weinberger, I call on you to get us out of the arms race.
We'd be delighted to try to deal with those matters in the question period, but it would be a little more effective if we have a paragraph. Well, what we were going into at that particular point was the necessity for doing what we do as we see it. And the gentleman has reminded me that ours is only one viewpoint, and there are obviously others. Maybe I should just state to you the reason for our viewpoint, and then we can take disagreements with that in the question period. And the reason for our viewpoint is that, as we see it, we have a substantial build-up to face. We have a very, very large, a very rapid increase in arms that have been acquired by the Soviet Union, and acquired in a very steady and predictable fashion. I happen to have been in the government, as was so mentioned in such a very nice, generous introduction some years ago, and I used to receive daily briefings as to our strength and the strength of other countries. That was between 1970 and 75. And then quite properly, I did not have those briefings when I was out of the government, and then when I came back in again in January 1981, they resumed. And the difference in that period of time, just in that 5.5-year period, was really staggering to see how rapidly the Soviets had grown during that period, and how much momentum they had obtained by reason of the things that they had ordered, the procurement that they had made from a military point of view in the 70s when we did. There were a number of reasons why that occurred. We have always been basically a peace-loving people. We've always had the idea that we don't want to commit a large part of our resources to defense expenditures. We would much rather put them into things that we consider more useful. Defense expenditures have never been popular, never will be in a free, open, democratic society, because ever since long ago, but at least as long ago as 200 years, de Tocqueville was commenting in various essays that he wrote about how hard it was for free, open, democratic societies to get the public consensus necessary to help them arm and keep themselves armed. And yet it's vital that we do that, because if you face a potential adversary who seems to have acquired such a very great degree of strength, that who is continuing to acquire it in all fields, land, sea, and air, conventional and strategic, why then you have to ask yourself if it is possible to deter attack, to maintain the peace, to have a sufficient degree of strength so that an attack will appear unprofitable and something that will bring about a degree of retaliatory force that that adversary will find to be totally unacceptable. And if you feel that that is essential, and if you feel that we are slipping away from the point where we will have that degree of strength, then I think we will have a situation in which we will be actually encouraging and indeed inviting aggression. And that is our whole strategy. The strategy that the President has recently formalized recognizes the need to maintain armed forces in peacetime, not because we're planning to use them with war, but as a guarantee of peace. And we really seek only to ensure that we and our allies can pursue our goals of peace, free from intimidation, coercion, and aggression. And to do so, our allies and our friends must be able to deter aggression by maintaining the capability to respond to aggression. And we have to do that against any aggression that might be launched against us. And obviously, we would prefer to do it in such a way that we were able to maintain the lowest possible level of violence and not escalate any conflict to a nuclear conflict. That requires a substantial degree of success, a substantial degree of development of conventional as well as strategic arms, and it essentially requires what we're trying to do. Basic objective has remained absolutely constant through this whole post-war period. We seek simply to survive as a nation, to be free to pursue our way of life, to preserve the democratic community of nations, and to live in a stable and a peaceful world. And in the post-war period, the primary challenge to our successful pursuit of these goals has been the Soviet Union. Because, as I mentioned, for the past 20 years, they have added enormously to their nuclear forces, to their conventional forces, to their global expansion, and it's been quite clear that they have been willing to use this growing military power directly in Afghanistan, indirectly through intimidation in Poland, and through the acquisition of various client states, and through the acquisition also of bases and facilities in all parts of the world. Right now, they are, for example, conducting surveillance over the British fleet in the Falkland area from bases in Angola and elsewhere. So that they have acquired this strength. They're quite willing to use it, and they have indeed taken all the steps that would indicate that they believe, first, that a nuclear war is winnable, and secondly, that they must continue to acquire immense superiority in the conventional field. And so all of these things, I think, have led to a situation in which we found it necessary, because of our declining defense budget, to reassure the world that America was again a strong and reliable ally, was going to take the hard and difficult steps necessary in terms of the decade from 70 to 80, while the rest of our budget was growing at a rate of about almost 200% in real terms. And we also had to review the history and conclude that the history of trying to reduce Soviet armaments and reduce Soviet military strength through periods of detente, through periods of negotiations for salt treaties, through exchanges of various cultural and educational and technical missions, that all of those things we hoped would show that we were basically a country of goodwill and we wanted peace, and all of these were elements not necessarily unilateral disarmament, but of hopes that if we took basically friendly actions, the Soviets would too. The Soviets liked the time apparently, and they attended all of the various joint missions, but they kept on arming. And it's been said that when we armed, they armed, and when we disarmed, they armed. And it just kept going until inevitably a gap opened and is continuing to open. The conventional forces of ours have been increasingly out of balance with the Soviets, and the strategic nuclear balance certainly has been beginning to tip in their advantage. It erodes the deterrent value of our strategic nuclear forces, and now they have both a nuclear superiority that requires us to act and to act as rapidly as we can. And that's one of the frustrating parts about the position, because now it seems to me that it takes so much longer to do any of these things or to deploy any of these large and complex and very expensive weapon systems. We used to be able to do things much more rapidly. We brought the whole Minuteman system online in about 3 years. We now know that it will be starting in 1981 as we did, that it will take till about the end of the decade, almost 1988 in some systems, 89 in others, to complete the restoration of strength to the triad of deterrence. Unfortunately, we have to do all three parts of the triad at once. Our Minuteman system is now very vulnerable to very accurate Soviet missiles. And there are very high estimates of how much of it would go out on a Soviet first strike. The bombers that which we rely, the B-52s, are about 28 years old in many cases. They're no longer able, will not be in a couple of years or more, to penetrate increasingly strong Soviet air defenses. And the submarine missiles in our submarines, which is the most survivable, protectable part of the triad, those missiles do not have the yield necessary to destroy Soviet hardened targets. And that's another part of the equation. Soviets have been hardening these targets. They've been spending enormous amounts on civil defense. They have been increasing their air defense. They have a refiring capability so that even after they fire from one of their silos, they can fire again from the same silo. Now, all of these technical and extremely disagreeable sort of subjects have to be mentioned because they are the evidence. These are the pieces of evidence that indicate that the Soviets are indeed able to, or the Soviets believe that a nuclear war is winnable. We don't think a nuclear war is winnable. We think that a nuclear war can be deterred if we have the strength to do it. And we think it can be deterred if the Soviets correctly perceive that we have a degree of strength that if we were attacked in a first strike, our retaliatory capability would be such that it would inflict damage on the Soviets that they would find unacceptably high, unacceptable, and consequently that they would make that first strike. You're only going to be able to get that, and only going to be able to secure that, if indeed you have a survivable, accurate system with the yield to destroy hardened target. And that is why we feel we do have to modernize and replace all parts of the triad, and why it's a very expensive job, $180 billion, and it's going to take us about 6 years. And the problem is the consequences of not doing it. Because if the Soviets know that they can keep our air attack out of their country through their air defense, if they know that they can knock our missiles out with a single strike, if they know that our submarines cannot destroy their target, they are going to get less and less worried about the effects of a retaliatory strike and more encouraged to make an aggressive first strike. And that is the great danger. And that is the reason that we have to do these very big and very expensive things. Now, obviously, if we can avoid them, if we can adopt a strategy as the President has now adopted, and as we adopted when we came in, of changing the idea that any kind of conflict would be a very short, sharp, conventional phase, and then would escalate quickly to a nuclear phase, a nuclear exchange, and then would be over. We can't do that anymore because we don't have that degree of nuclear superiority that we used to have, and we don't have the conventional strength. So what we have to do, in addition to regaining a nuclear deterrent, is to add to our conventional strength. Now this has led some people, some unkind critics, to say that we have no real strategy and that all we want to do is just buy everything in sight all at once. Well, the problem is that the defenses that we found were in a state of neglect. And they were in a state of neglect for the reasons that I mentioned, that we don't like to spend money on these things. And we also had a great revulsion of feeling after Vietnam that turned us back inward again, almost amounting to a degree of isolationism. Understandable perhaps, but very dangerous, because to the extent that you allow these gaps to develop, to the extent that you allow superiority to pass to the other side, your deterrent erodes, and you may find yourself in a situation where you are not able to respond and where you are indeed encouraging an attack. Particularly when you face the degree of strength that we face, you know that that's growing, when you know that we've been out-invested year after year, and when you know that there appears to be developing from external evidence a feeling that a nuclear war is winnable. So all of these things have led to the types of strategy that we have adopted, the idea that we must reacquire deterrence and credible deterrence, and that we're not engaging in an arms race. It's been a one-nation arms race. What we're trying to do is regain defensive strength and to regain it as quickly as possible. There's one other, perhaps even more important aspect of all of this that I haven't mentioned yet, and that is that the President has called for strategic arms
policy. The President's called for the first-rate policy. We have 35,000 nuclear weapons, enough to kill the Soviet Union 40 times over.
Don't you want to wait for a question period and then we can Why don't you do that, and then we'll have a question period, and then you can be heard. Because I'm just about to talk about something that I think you're very much more interested in, and that's the strategic arms reduction policy. And a weapon that gives you a substantial advantage in the intermediate range. We have none. If you will take that weapon out, we will not deploy any of the ones we plan to deploy, the ones that we are now building, the Pershing II and the ground-launched cruise missile, and at least in that area alone, of intermediate range weapons, we will be down to zero on both sides. Now, everyone said, or very many people said, when that policy was being formulated, that isn't realistic. The Soviets will never agree to that. We shouldn't even propose it. It will appear to be the world that we are not serious about negotiations, etc., etc. The President was not moved by such arguments. He wanted to do what he felt was right, and incidentally, I've talked to him many times about these matters, and it is a matter of enormous importance to him to help bring about the peace. It's his greatest goal, his greatest ambition, the only real legacy that he thinks to leave. And so he made a talk, which, as I say, wasn't dismissed as being not serious or not attainable. It quite literally did electrify Europe. I happened to be over at some NATO meetings about that time, and it was an amazing and a most welcome response. And the Soviets didn't reject it out of hand. They're negotiating. They've been negotiating since December in Geneva on the subject. I don't know how it will come out. I do know that negotiations with the Soviets are very long and very difficult, require immense amounts of patience. But I do know one thing, that you don't have any hope whatever of succeeding if you don't have some strength, if you don't have some kind of credible incentive to the Soviets to enter into genuine arms reduction. And that's exactly what the President has now offered on a different scale and different context on the intercontinental range. That's the kind of talk that he made at Eureka. That's the kind of proposal that is now about to be discussed in the negotiations that will open, I hope, in June, sometime very close to then. And it is that sort of, out of that sort of process, that we can most hope for a result that can really do more, I think, perhaps, to ensure the maintenance of peace in the world at lower levels, with far more hope and far less danger than anything else. But again, you cannot emerge from a negotiation of that kind. Indeed, in many cases, you can barely start, unless you have something very credible to offer them, unless there's something that they really perceive is to their advantage that they can gain from negotiations of that kind. And therefore, you cannot go into negotiations of that kind weakly, nor do you have any hope of emerging from them unless you do everything. So this is perhaps another, I wouldn't say the most important, but a very important reason for doing what we're doing, to try to regain the strength as quickly as possible. And then there's something that we do have to bear in mind. Much as we want these talks to succeed, and deeply as the President would like to secure a favorable result from these talks, we cannot fulfill our trust to the American people, nor our responsibility to the American people, if we didn't at least consider the possibility that the negotiations might not succeed. And if they do not succeed, and we have not done anything to regain our defensive strength, and after 4 or 5 months or 4 or 5 years of negotiation, and one of the negotiations, the mutual balanced force reduction negotiation, has been going on 9 years, if we should emerge at that period of time and conclude that we aren't going to be able to do much by negotiation, 2 things would happen. One of 2 things both. We would be subject to attack, or we would be sufficiently weak because the Soviets, as history has showed, have never slowed down, regaining and continuing to gain defensive strength during all this period. And if that should happen, then we would find ourselves in a position of such weakness that we would either be immediately subject to attack or subject to subjugation by threat, what Mrs. Thatcher has always called nuclear blackmail. And that both of those alternatives are totally intolerable. And so we have to regain this strength, not only to continue our deterrence, but to enable us to secure the kind of reductions that can get us deterrence at the vastly lower levels on both sides. And I don't think that's in any way impossible, but I do think it's impossible if we don't regain this strength and regain and restore this military balance. Well, now, what will it really take to do this? It'll take a lot of money, and it'll take a lot of sacrifice, and it'll take a lot of years. There just should not be, one shouldn't hide this at all, or shouldn't try to minimize it. It is a very expensive and a very painful business, and it is made more so by reason of the fact that we have not done the things that we should have done for the last at least 10 years. And when you add the delays that are involved anyway, when you add inflation that has taken place to that, it is going to be a great deal of money. Now, I just had an interview on television here a few moments ago in which the amount was discussed. And the interviewer said it's going to be $1.5 trillion over the next 6 years. and I had to correct you, it's going to be $1.6 trillion, a year. But we've got to keep it in a sense of proportion, because that immense stuff, almost impossible to accomplish, will only be less than 1/3 of what the total that the federal government will be spending on movement. The total federal expenditures for that period, in other words, that will be about 30% of the total federal planned expenditures for the next 6 years. That means that all of the other functions that we're doing will still cost us an immense amount of money. We will not be stinting anything else. It is essential to reduce total federal expenditures, just as a simple matter of trying to prevent inflation. And we've had very good luck with reducing inflation since we've been in office. But welfare, food stamps, transportation expenditures, health expenditures, educational expenditures, all of these things will still be going on at a high rate, and defense will be at less than 30%. So anybody with a calculator can figure out how many trillions of dollars we will have to be spending on the other things. The simple fact of the matter is all of these things are immensely expensive. It is recognized and understood and agreed that in a free democratic society we don't want to concentrate all of our efforts on military. But it is also agreed, it should be, I think, it should be understood, maybe it's not, that there is only one social program that permits all of these other social domestic programs to exist, and that is adequate national security. It is also the one thing that will permit personal freedom, liberty, the kind of society that we've always had. It is also, I think, essential that we bear in mind that the alternatives to not doing it are something that we simply have never even contemplated in this country. Not just military defeat, but a loss of all of the values that we hold dear, a loss of all of the values and qualities under which we have existed, our forefathers existed. We assume our children and grandchildren will continue to exist. I don't mean to try to overinflate any of these dangers or anything of the kind. But we have to look not only at history, but at experience. And experience shows very clearly that countries that do neglect their defenses, that do put themselves in a position of strategic and security inferiority, are subject to this kind of potential attack. The other problem is that we never have, we have no idea how long we will have to try to regain this strength. We barely had enough time in World War II. We had, at that time, for people who were willing to watch the signs and analyze things and tell themselves realistically what was happening, we had about 2 years. It was barely enough time. And we, because of our productive genius and our inventive technological skills, we were able to overcome enormous deficiencies that we had at the beginning, and ultimately to prevail. I don't know how much time we'll have this time. I don't know how much warning we will have. I don't know how long. I don't know how long it will take to regain the strength that we need, and that's at least 5 to 6 years. At least 6 years, but 6 years of steady, constant that involve and imply a national resolution and a national will. And I think it is absolutely essential that we have that will, that we demonstrate it, that we exert it, that we advise our representatives of it. Because if we start 1 year, as we did last year, Congress enacted virtually everything the President requested last year. If we start 1 year and then stop the next, and then hope that maybe we can regain the third, because the second year has some temporary economic difficulties or something of that kind, then we will not only delay it, we will take perhaps longer than we had. We will make it infinitely more expensive, because starting and stopping is one of the things that we've always found does make it more expensive. And some of our programs provide for more expenditures the first year than in the second, because we found we could save quite a lot of money by trying to get the things that we need, ordering them early, doing multi-year and advanced procurement and other technical means of trying to reduce the ultimate cost. Well, now I have done something, ladies and gentlemen, that has confused the press very much, and I'm sorry about that, and that is that I've discarded my prepared text, and I have talked about things that seem to me to be vital in as plain language as I could, rather than the somewhat stilted phraseology of a written, drafted speech. I've done it because I feel very deeply about these things. I feel that it is extremely important that we understand how vital it is to follow along the path that we've set out. Not because it's a partisan matter, because this president has asked it, but simply because we have come to a point where, unless we continue, we have started, unless we continue, we can leave ourselves dangerously weak. These are responsibilities that are assigned for the time being to me as a temporary trustee of this department. And there are responsibilities which others have fulfilled in the past and others will in the future. But the simple fact of the matter is that we have to keep going in a firm, resolute way. And that if we don't do that, if we decide that temporary economic conditions have to divert us, if we decide that we should base our policy on hopes that if we don't do anything at this time and spend our money on other things that are more attractive to us, that the other side will conclude that we aren't a threat and will cut their expenditures down. All of these things represent, I think, very grave dangers based on history of the last 21 years. And so I think it is vital that we have these in mind. Obviously, there are a lot of people who disagree with that. I know at least two. Obviously, there are going to be all kinds of questions about why we do this and why we don't do that, within the context of agreeing that maybe we should do it. And those are questions I'm delighted to try to take now and try to answer, and of course in a larger context, answer before the time. But I did want you to know as simply and as sincerely, as succinctly as possible, why it is we're doing this, why it is we feel it is so vital, and why it is that we appear to have reversed the policy of the previous administration. We actually haven't, because every administration has had in mind deterrence. There are different ways of trying to achieve it. And we think the only way to achieve it is to regain the strength that we used to have and to enter into negotiations with clear-cut proposals that would result in sharp reductions of arms, not a lot of formulas about limitations that allow everyone to expand, but sharp reductions of arms, get ourselves back to equality with the other side, and then proceed in every way we can to improve relationships and concentrate our efforts on more peaceful activities within the shield and behind the shield and under the umbrella of the kind of safety that deterrence can produce for all of us. And really, the issue is nothing more or less important than whether or not we want to maintain the kind of freedom that we've always enjoyed and the kind of peace that we know we can have. Not peace alone, but peace with freedom. And so those are the reasons that I have decided that I should talk to you so plainly tonight, and to the press, should there be any here, I offer my apologies because I have once again deviated from the text that has been issued. I will stand behind that text, but I thought I would much rather have you here as sincerely and as forcefully as I can express it, the reasons which motivate us. Thank you very much indeed.
Mr. Secretary, we certainly thank you for your authentic and comprehensive view of the administration's position and for your display of equanimity as well. Thank you.
After all, I come from San Francisco, and if you don't get used to that, start thinking there where you never will.
With the Secretary's presentation as a base, I know you all have a lot of questions. There are microphones in the center of the three central aisles. To ask your question, please come to those microphones. I'll recognize you before the Secretary answers your question. Mr. Friedman.
Thank you. Mr. Weinberger, you said, I believe, no less than 3 times tonight that the Soviets feel that a nuclear war is winnable.
Yes.
You also said that you're willing to grant the Soviet leaders a modicum of rationality in their 1/10. Just forward, pretty well destroy the Soviet Union. Would a rational Soviet leader do this?
Well, I have to respond by saying that I don't know, and my margin for error is very small, and that the Soviets, the reason I said I'm beginning to think there's some external evidence that they believe a nuclear war is winnable, is that they have been investing very, very large amounts in civil defense, in hardened facilities to try to shelter portions of their population, their command and control facilities, their civil government leadership facilities, and so on. I don't know. I haven't any idea. I know our reactions, but what I'm not sure of is what they are beginning to think, or whether they are beginning to feel that they could absorb that kind of punishment and still continue. I think there is considerable evidence that some of them are beginning to think that they could. And in view of that, I have to be very worried about it. As I said, I don't believe a nuclear war is winnable, and our administration doesn't. But I do think that if we can acquire a substantially greater margin of safety, by which I mean catch up in many ways with them, that they will be discouraged from believing that they could be, and even with those various assets that I have mentioned. But I think that if they feel that they can, with a first strike, destroy so much of our ability to respond, then I think the danger increases.
Mr. Secretary, both General Meyer and General Jones have advocated a reformation of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, so that the chiefs become genuine advocates of national security as opposed to being advocates of their own particular service. Can you indicate your sentiment vis-a-vis those reform proposals and what the mind of Congress happens to be on the subject, particularly the Armed Services Committee, and whether or not those proposals are close to fruition?
Well, I can start at the end. I don't think they're close to fruition. They're very sincerely meant proposals made by men who have served a long time on the Joint Chiefs. General Jones feels that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs needs considerably more authority. He would divest the members of the Joint Chiefs from their service leadership responsibilities. As you know, each of the Joint Chiefs is head of his own service, chief of his own service. And he feels that that sets up a basic incompatibility and doesn't permit as much unified planning as he would like. General Meyer has somewhat different views, but they also, I think, go toward increasing the general authority of the chairman and improving, or at least trying to coordinate the staff activities. Admiral Hayward belongs to a third school of thought, and that is that there shouldn't be any change. We have a new chairman coming in, General Vesey, and 2 new members of the Joint Chiefs because of the normal rotation. And what I've done is to consult with them and ask them to develop their views so that we can consider whether or not we want to make any formal recommendations to the Congress. The Congress, meanwhile, has been holding hearings, but they haven't had reached any conclusion. And it's a little hard to tell even from the questioning whether there's any degree of unanimity on any proposed change. My own feeling is that at least one change we should try to make, and I don't know if we need any change in regulations or not, but essentially I think there's a feeling now that service on the staff of the Joint Chiefs is a form of penance that is required of every officer as he works his way up to the top, and he serves it willingly and gracefully, but he's just as glad when it's over. I would like to have more incentives and have it be quite clear that service on the staff of the Joint Chiefs is a vitally important part of the nation's military planning and can help not hurt a man in his career. But I'm sure there are a lot of other changes that may well be made. Certainly they will be carefully considered. It's where a lot of the vital planning is done. And the fact that General Jones, after his vast experience, feels that there are some major changes that are needed is persuasive. But we do need a lot of examination of different viewpoints. And clearly, the new chairman, General Vesey, who will be sworn in next month, is the man who should be consulted most closely, and that's what we're doing.
Thank you.
My question goes to the administration's policy of arms sales in the Middle East, specifically with regard to Jordan, at a time when the Camp David Accords are the centerpiece of the administration's diplomatic policy. And I understand Secretary Haig is giving a speech on that today. Why are we increasing the sophistication of what we're selling to the Jordanians when they have shown nothing but disdain for the Camp David process? And in general, why do we continue to sell as many arms as we do when those arms are not being used to counter a Soviet threat, but to fight not just Arabs against the Israelis, but among the Arab nations themselves?
Well, I think there are a couple of assumptions that are either incorrect or at least which I would disagree in the question. But basically, what we feel is, first of all, that the commitment that we have to Israel and to maintain its military superiority is unswerving, and the commitment to which we are fully attached, and one that will be carried out. One that everything we're doing is to carry it out. The White Papers carried announcements of some additional weapons that are to be made available to Israel. And that's part of a pattern. Nobody suggests for a moment that that should be changed or weakened. There are, however, a number of people who feel, and I'm one of them, that we can help carry out that commitment if we are able to have a number of friends in the Mideast. If we're able to build a network of friendships and alliances and strengthen a number of those countries so that they can defend themselves. And that thereby we can be perhaps more persuasive with them in continuing with either the Camp David process or a process that can lead to a far more stable peace than we have in the Mideast at the moment. We had one example of how that works last September, I guess it was, when the president was able to have Syria persuaded. We couldn't persuade them, but we got Saudi Arabia to help persuade them because we had a developing and improving relationship with Saudi Arabia, to get them to persuade Syria to enter into a ceasefire with Israel, not to put any more missiles into the Bekaa Valley area. And that ceasefire is held, pretty fragile in various incidents, but generally speaking, that's held. We don't think we could ever have gotten anywhere near that if we were perceived as only having one friendship in the Mideast, and not wanting or not taking any of the steps necessary to secure friendships and add to the strength of a number of other moderate Arab states. The defense that they need is very real. Jordan, for example, feels very threatened by Syria, with the Iran-Iraq war taking the turn that it has, and Iran now making very threatening noises to a number of other states, including Oman and Saudi Arabia itself, and Jordan. These countries feel, and I certainly agree with them, that they need defensive weapons, particularly weapons that can help them defend their airspace. And so we believe that it's vital that, in addition to keeping the military edge to Israel, as we've always said, and that we've always done, as we always should do, that it is important that we have other friendships, and that we try through that means to improve the security of Israel, to improve our own security, incidentally, along with it, and to help the security of the entire region against a potential aggression from the Soviet Union.
Mr. Secretary, with all due respect, I cannot help but wonder if you might do a disservice to the American public by giving the impression by your slogan sort of statement that we have been disarming while the Soviet Union has been arming, when in fact we've moved ahead, maybe not with the speed that you would like, with such programs as the cruise missile and Trident II and so forth. We have not been at slumber. But I really wish to question whether indeed we are behind in the arms race, when I think, well, surely you have the information, not I, but that the accuracy of our nuclear strategic weapon force, the diversity of delivery system, and the number of warheads, we are clearly ahead of the Soviet Union. And I think we ought to be frank about that. The question I really have is with regard to strength at the negotiation tables. I believe the essential strength beyond weapons and delivery systems and so forth, is the strength of the people. And I believe the American people genuinely wish nuclear disarmament. I believe the people of Japan, of Western Europe, of the Third World, and I wish then to hear you respond to this viewpoint, that beyond weaponry, beyond systems of delivery, that if we could represent the strength of American public opinion as demonstrated in polls, world opinion, strength that cries out in its humanity for disarmament.
Well, I would respond first by saying that I think by saying that I agree with you that all the American people want peace, and I have found no one who wants a war or wants nuclear war, and I number myself in that same group. I would say that I think you're quite wrong, dangerously wrong, on your assessment of the relative military strength of the United States and the Soviet Union. That the accuracy of our missiles is no longer, nor is the yield sufficient to provide a credible deterrent, and that's why we have to improve it, modernize it, strengthen it, if you like. If we could get out of arms limitation talks, arms reduction talks, with a result that was verifiable and enabled us to say with certainty to the American people that we could make sharp reductions on both sides to the point of equality, which does not now exist on both sides, no one would be more delighted than I or than our entire administration. I know it's the President's fondest wish. The strength of the people and the will of the people is in the free countries of the world is exactly as you described it. I have no doubt that the majority of the Soviet people would feel exactly the same thing, but there's a significant difference. And the difference is that public opinion is not a factor in the Soviet Union. Soviet leaders are not in any way constrained by, nor need they attempt to ascertain what public opinion is in their country. There is no way in which public opinion can express itself, and if it does, it is subject to instant static repression. And we know that from every evidence that we have of the dissidents, the people who do manage finally to get out. And so it is quite unrealistic to say that the goodwill and the desires of the people, which is questionably very strong in our country, in our kinds of systems in the West, does prevail and should prevail, can have any effect at all on the leadership or on the policy of the Soviet Union. So what we have to do, I think, is to, first of all, to try to gain a degree of strength, regain a degree of strength that will enable us to deter attack while we are negotiating, regain a degree of strength that can bring us a successful negotiating result. And if that succeeds, we'll all be vastly better off. And if it fails, so that we will not be left in a position where, despite the wishes of our people and all peoples in the West, we subject ourselves to either threats that amount to nuclear blackmail or an actual attack which we would not be able to resist with sufficient strength. So that is the reason that I feel we have to do what we're doing, and the reasons why I disagree with you.
Would an agreement between the United States and the USSR to eliminate nuclear weapons by the end of this century be in the mutual interest of the two signatories and other countries of the world?
I think it might very well be. I would want to be sure it was verifiable. I would want to be sure of the stages by which the reductions occurred. And I want to be sure that there were not other powers who at the same time the United States and the Soviet Union were entering into that kind of an arrangement were also parties to it. But under those circumstances, as long as we can be sure that there is complete compliance and that you end up with parity, and if parity is gone to zero, yes, I think it would be very much to our interest. I think it would be vastly to our interest to get things far lower than they are now. But it has to be done equally, and it has to be done in a way that can enable us to be sure that we can carry out our responsibilities to the American people. And those responsibilities are nothing more nor less than to maintain the kind of conditions under which we can preserve our people.
Mr. Secretary, I have two questions. In the Baltimore Sun paper a week or two ago, there was writing about the administration reducing the subsidies to the 26 American shipyards. How is that going to take and affect the building of our naval vessels and our merchant fleet, which would be very bad? My second question is, based upon your talk about our need for preparedness, what is the thinking in the administration about reinstituting the military draft from the standpoint of having a pool available to use these weapons if God forbid we should ever need them?
Well, on the first one, we are talking about reducing subsidies all across the board because we feel that, first of all, total expenditures do have to be brought down if we're going to continue to keep control of inflation, and we've really made remarkable strides in reducing inflation far faster and far better than any of us had hoped. And I hope it's a permanent pattern. And that will involve eliminating some subsidies of some businesses, some industries, some lines of activity that perhaps have been useful in the past. The United States has a basic policy that if we can do this, if we can get control of inflation, if we can have tax programs which have already been enacted, as long as they're not disturbed, which can provide incentives for investment in job-producing activity, that we can eliminate the need for subsidies. We can get our economy strong enough and with enough incentives for job-producing investment so that subsidies will no longer be needed, no longer required. And that will be, I think, better for all of us. I don't know of anybody that wants a subsidy. A lot of people feel that subsidies are needed. So I would hope that that would be the way in which we would regain and maintain the kind of industrial base, shipbuilding base that we obviously will need both in the merchant marine and for the Navy. On the second part of your question, draft, conscription, and all of that, we ought to start with this point, and that is that the President, and I bound to tell you in all candor, I fully support it, is against compulsion in every form. Sometimes compulsion is going to be required, and if we're in a war, compulsion obviously would be required. But just as long as possible, and certainly in all peacetime situations, the President is definitely against the draft because of that reason. The other reason to be against it is that it's totally unnecessary. Right now, and frankly, ever since January of 1981, and it's one of the more remarkable turnarounds I've seen, one of the brightest pictures of the entire national security scene, is the personnel picture. We are right now recruiting at more than 100% of the available positions to the amounts appropriated by the Congress. We are quite literally turning away people who want to volunteer for the armed services. Now, some people will say, well, that's just because we have a recession and they can't get jobs. Part of that is true. I think there is a recession, and there is unemployment, and I think that's partly true. But I don't think it's all of it by any means. Some people say, well, part of it is because the Congress has finally passed an appropriate pay scale, and men are now, and women in the armed services are now getting something more in the way of equitable income, and part of that's true. But I think a large part of it also is true, due to the tremendous improvement in national morale. The fact, as the President says, that it's an honor to wear the uniform again. And that, I think, is a very important thing. I saw a few years ago soldiers returning from Vietnam who were booed and hissed and picketed. And that's a pretty disgusting thing when people have served their country, regardless of whether the cause was one that other people approved of. That spirit is gone now. and people have to, should feel that the work they do is important and needed and appreciated. And I think that has a lot to do with it. But one way or another, we clearly do not need a draft now. In addition to the numbers, we have a vastly improved quality. People are coming in with much higher IQs and much fewer applying with low IQs. And the people are staying in. Experienced, trained people are not leaving right away, either at the officer or the enlisted level. And in all ways, we just feel that that picture is extremely bright, and a draft is not only very unwelcome, but it's totally unnecessary.
Mr. Secretary, you have advanced as one of the compelling reasons for the tremendous buildup in our defense, the need to be strong in negotiations. You have also indicated, other than people that are spoken today, that there are others who have a very different opinion.
Yes.
And it is possible, I think, that there are other opinions that they may also be right. Let me say from my own position that I am a strong believer in nuclear disarmament and nuclear freedom. But what I wanted to ask you was some help in answering a question posed to me by our 14-year-old son. I recently attended a seminar on the medical effects of nuclear weapons. It was describing to him the effect of a 1 megaton bomb dropped on the city of Baltimore, and the effects of the blast, the heat, and the radiation. His question to me was, why would anyone want to consider developing or using such a weapon?
Well, he's asked a question that demonstrates that he is wise beyond his years. The problem is we are faced with that kind of a threat. And the question is, what do you do about it? And I don't think you do about it by giving up all of our nuclear weapons, nor do I think you successfully compete with it or deal with it by taking the position that because we have perhaps the same number of warheads as the Soviet Union, we're therefore equal and can freeze. Both of those are very dangerously wrong approaches, in my opinion. Firstly, because measuring warheads or counting warheads is no way to measure critical deterrence. You have to look at yield and accuracy and range and all of those other things. And secondly, you have to consider what are effective ways of delivering these terrible instruments. You have to work with these horrible equations to keep them in balance if you want to prevent that 1 megaton or vastly heavier nuclear weapon dropping on us. And that is exactly what we're all trying to do. There are different ways of doing it. My fear is that if we take out everything we have and extend a hopeful request to the Soviets, that history demonstrates that they would be absolutely delighted because it would advance them much closer to their ultimate goal of world domination, from which they've never deviated, never varied. And that's why I think we have to do what we're doing. But that's also why I think a nuclear war is unwinnable, and why it has to be deterred. The question is, how do you deter it? Some people say, freeze now, give up all our nuclear weapons, and hope for the best. We think you deter it by providing a deterrent that will convince the Soviets it's very much against their interest ever to try it. As I say, our margin for error is small, and we will never know whether or not the proposal that we make is the best. History is on our side, and history is against the other side. For 34 years, we have deterred a nuclear attack. I believe we can continue to do that if we can maintain the conditions which have produced that deterrence.
In the light of the information about the devastation of a nuclear attack, and in the light of your comments about the concerns about expenditures, how can you justify the expenditure for civil defense and the plans that seem to be burgeoning at the moment?
Well, the plans and expenditures for civil defense are comparatively modest by any kind of comparison with either other activities of the United States government or with the Soviet expenditures that have already been made. They are essentially part of the vital necessity of improving the command and control and communication with all of these terrible weapons. It is now possible, because we have no civil defense, because we have no real air defense in this country, it is now possible that a first strike would disrupt completely our ability to communicate or to command the facilities that we have. And that would again be a rather clear signal to the Soviets as to how easily they could, in effect, put our forces out of action. So the civil defense that is proposed is for command centers, for what we call government continuity facility, and to some extent to try to examine the feasibility as to whether there is any kind of hardening or any kind of protection that could be even reasonably effective for these particular activities. It does not in any sense demonstrate or indicate that we think a nuclear war is winnable. It is an important part of deterrence.
My very deep apologies to Mr. Blumberg, who's going to ask the next question, the rest of you who have questions, and to the audience that we have to draw to a close. We appreciate very, very much that the Secretary was so good to share so much of his time with us.